Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Sunday the 3rd of July. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is the Full Scottish. This afternoon, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 130 of the illegal Russian war of aggression. Then I'll introduce our fantastic guests, and then together we will look at the key headlines over the past week from Scotland and around the world. At least 3 people were killed and dozens of residential buildings damaged in the Russian city of Belgorod on Sunday, the region's governor said, after reports of several blasts in the city near the Ukrainian border. Vyacheslav Gladkov said at least 11 apartment buildings and 39 residential houses were damaged, including 5 houses destroyed. The Ukrainian army has rejected claims that the Russian-backed militias and Russian forces have surrounded the key eastern city of Lysychansk. A Ukrainian National Guard spokesman, Ruslan Mzukchuk, said fighting was raging around the city, but it remained under Ukrainian control. US intelligence says Russian forces are continuing to achieve minor advances in Lysychansk amid the continuing air and artillery strikes. Ukrainian forces probably continue to block Russian forces in the city's southeastern outskirts, according to the latest UK Ministry of Defence report. Russia's Defence Ministry has said its forces destroyed 5 Ukrainian army command posts in Donbass and in the Mykolaiv region, according to Russian state media. 3 weapons storage sites were also destroyed in Zaporizhia, in the southeast of Ukraine, the ministry was quoted as saying. The claims have not been independently verified. The president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, has claimed Ukraine attempted to strike military facilities on Belarusian territory. The state-run Belta news agency reported that Lukashenko said, without providing any evidence, that Ukrainian armed forces tried to strike facilities in Belarus 3 days ago, but the missiles were intercepted. Rescue workers have recovered as many as 29 body fragments amid the rubble of deadly Russian missile strikes on a shopping centre in the Ukrainian city of Kremenchuk, Ukraine's state emergency service has said. At least 19 people were killed on Monday after 2 Russian X-22 cruise missiles hit a crowded shopping centre in Kremenchuk, officials said. The UK government has condemned the exploitation of prisoners of war as 2 more British men held by Russian proxies in eastern Ukraine and charged with mercenary activities could face the death penalty. Andrew Hill of Plymouth and Dylan Healy from Huntingdon were reported to have been charged with forcible seizure of power and undergoing terrorist training, according to the state news agency in Russian-controlled Donetsk. A Briton and a Moroccan man sentenced to death by pro-Russia officials in Russian-controlled eastern Ukraine have appealed against their sentences, Russian state media has reported. The Supreme Court in the Russian-backed Donetsk People's Republic has received appeals from lawyers for Brahim Sadoun and Sean Pinner, according to the Russian state news agency TASS. Another Briton sentenced to death by the Russian proxy court, Aiden Aslan, has not yet submitted an appeal, TASS has reported. And a series of recent assassination attempts targeting pro-Russian officials suggests a growing resistance movement against Russian-backed authorities occupying parts of southern Ukraine, according to US officials. The resistance could grow into a wider counterinsurgency that would pose a significant challenge to Russia's ability to control captured Ukrainian territories, CNN cited US officials as saying. Now, we are lucky enough to be joined by 2 brilliant guests today. Linda Fabiani served as a member of our Scottish Parliament from 1999 until she retired at the last Scottish election. When she retired, Linda was the Deputy Presiding Officer of our Parliament. Linda, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm absolutely grand. Thank you, Andrew. Hello, everyone.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon, Linda. And Greg McCarra is currently the Chief Executive of the Scottish Independence Foundation. SIF raises funds to provide financial support to the independence campaign, enabling the grassroots to engage as widely as possible and to encourage those who are not yet persuaded to join. SIF aims to be the trusted custodian of funds generated by individual contributions, channeling them into projects which benefit the independence movement. Greg is also a former academic, a councillor and a trade unionist. Greg, good afternoon. How are you?
Very well, Andrew. We live in interesting times.
We do, and it's great that we've got the opportunity to discuss those interesting times with two such brilliant guests this afternoon. Now, it's been a little while since we led with COVID, but it feels like we're returning to perhaps times gone past, because COVID infection levels in the UK have risen more than 30% in a week, with an estimated 2.3 million people thought to have the disease in late June. Figures from the Office for National Statistics, based on swabs collected from randomly selected households, show that in the week ending the 25th of June, 1,829,100 people in England are estimated to have had COVID. That's about 1 in 30. Increases have also been seen in the rest of the UK, with an estimated 1 in 18 people in Scotland, 1 in 30 in Wales, and 1 in 25 in Northern Ireland. While still shy of the peak infection levels seen earlier this year, when about 1 in 13 people in England had COVID, the estimated number of infections in the UK is the highest since late April, and the highest ever seen for a month during the summer. So for both of you, life has in many ways returned to more or less as it was before, with crowded sporting events, graduations, music festivals, and travel, all features of people's lives again. So firstly, Linda, is there a risk perhaps that we have reverted to pre-pandemic behaviours too quickly and too much?
I think there is. I definitely do think there's a risk. Um, there's not such serious effects at the moment, of course, when people get COVID. I've heard loads of folks saying, "Oh, I've got COVID, and but actually I feel okay. It's just like a wee cold or whatever." But there's also, I've heard a few people who are getting it really badly, and it's lasting for a long time. They're testing positive for 2 weeks in some cases. So there is an issue. And it really came home to me last week when I was travelling last week, and I was on a plane a couple of times, and of course in airports. And there were very, very few of us wearing masks. And I thought, this is somewhere where people are crowded together, especially going through security, stuff like that. Hardly any masks on show. On the plane, which to me, rightly or wrongly, because I don't know the reality, rightly or wrongly, I feel that a plane is an enclosed space and somewhere that something could breed. So I wore my mask. Again, very, very few people wearing masks. I've also noticed going into restaurants, going into public places, quite often, you see the machine for the sanitizer and it's empty. So I think we've become quite complacent, and I'm a bit worried about that, because there's still a bit of a strain in the health service. We're talking about the boosters coming up again with winter coming in. I remember all the warnings before, how when winter comes in, you're more likely to get COVID. So that's a problem. And I was reading quite an interesting couple of articles over the last few days about, trying to bring forward what's going to be an annual booster as quickly as possible for as many people as possible. So yes, I think we're getting a bit complacent, and I think we should maybe be thinking about much stronger messaging about taking care. Yeah.
Thanks, Linda. Now, Greg, on Thursday, the Chief Medical Advisor to the UK Health Security Agency said the UK was likely to be hit by another COVID wave later this year. She was speaking at an online meeting, and she said, "I think this year will be even more challenging than normal. Our current planning assumptions are that we will see at least one wave of COVID in the autumn-winter period." She said planning was also underway for a wave of flu, noting that Australia, which of course is now in winter, was experiencing a particularly bad flu season. Data from Australia suggests the cases of flu in May were more than double that month's previous record. And she went on to say that guidance issued to the public on respiratory infections had been strengthened, advising that people with symptoms stay home if possible, avoid contact with others, and wear a mask if leaving home. She said, "I think that is good practice that we've seen in Asian countries for many years." So firstly, Greg, do you think that there's a risk here that we're now, having apparently come through the pandemic, we're being too dismissive of COVID, and we're about to be too dismissive of the flu this winter?
Definitely. And you know what? That's always the case, I reckon. And what we have to do is keep on reminding ourselves of how we should behave in these circumstances. When I was a wee boy, I remember the expression commonly used in health campaigns: coughs and sneezes spread diseases. And it was nice and simple. We kind of understood it. And if we didn't understand it, then if we were in, when I was a wee boy, if we were in my granny's house and I started coughing or sneezing, and then she'd tell me, cover your mouth, son. And you know, that's maybe a message that we all have to learn, because it's been a message for decades, and it always will be a message. Take care, show concern for other people. That's at an individual and a personal level. We should maybe take care and show more concern at Scottish level, because we have our own Scottish NHS, and at a UK level where the funding comes from. And it's fine. One part of I wouldn't say government, but the UK's health spokesperson, health advisor, saying that we should possibly, effectively self-isolate rather than run the risk of spreading COVID, especially if it's in the upturn. And at the same time, we see companies saying, well, we're not getting UK government support like we did before. There's no longer any furlough, and in fact, even help for people who have to self-isolate is disappearing. So tell you what, say these big companies, if you're ill, either you go off work, stay off work for as long as you need to, and you're in statutory minimum sick pay. That bankrupts people, that destroys families, they just can't afford to do it. So what do? They go into work and they spread it. They're between a rock and a hard place. Governments can intervene in these things. Some governments choose not to intervene in them. And I find that a bit of a shame. We may be entering the stage where herd immunity is what is expected international, because in the developed countries, then the overwhelming majority are infected. Tough luck in the underdeveloped countries, where sometimes the rates run at about 2%. That's really, really hellish on them. So let's have a bit of international concern here as well. So, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, we have to take individual responsibility. And I found myself going into shops previously without a mask and thinking, oh dear, we're right, back out to the car, grab a mask before I go in. Now, if I'm in the middle of the shop, I will admit I've been thinking, I'm here, I'll be finished in a few minutes, we'll just take care and not get too close to folk. We've got to all collectively and individually do better than that.
Thanks, Greg. A great worldview there, and also an individual view. Linda, Dr. Hopkins spoke about good practice in Asian countries, perhaps reappearing here. And in the same way as Greg was saying there, someone was telling me yesterday that if they have symptoms, they won't test, and they will still attend in-person events because those events are too important to miss. So why do you think we're seeing or what do you think is at the back of this apparent lack of respect and consideration for others?
Well, I think one thing that has been very bad is the taking away the free testing kits. I think that was a bad move by the UK government to stop that. I think Scottish government kept it up a wee bit longer. And I understand, though I don't know the details, that it's still possible to get free kits in certain circumstances. But I think that's had a big psychological effect where people say, oh, they don't feel testing is so important anymore. And the messaging has stopped. We're not getting the messaging that we got for so long about how difficult this disease actually is, and it can still have a very, very bad effect on some people. We still don't know the long-term effects of long COVID. So there are issues there, but I think that was a very, very basic thing. And as Greg was saying, not giving it an importance beyond any other reason for being off sick. It's all very well to be saying, people go to work and they shouldn't. But as Greg said, if you get bumped onto statutory sick pay, or indeed are in danger of losing your job because you're not turning up, which we've all heard these cases as well, it's a big problem. So the main aspect to this is that the messaging from the very top and with the funding is not there. The Westminster government could easily put in place, under their powers of employment law, they could put something in place that says, do you know what, until we're really on top of this, until we see how the variants are going, COVID is a real danger and people must be protected and should be treated different from everything else. I mean, I think the sick pay and underemployment law and stuff is awful anyway and should be changed and looked at for everyone. However, I think COVID should be an exception to start off with, and that's not been happening. So the message from the top has not been good.
Thanks, Linda. And just as you were speaking there, I've checked. Testing remains in Scotland, testing remains for specific groups in order to protect the highest risk setting and support clinical care. You can order tests online or by calling 119 if you're visiting a hospital or a care home, if you're an unpaid carer, if you're eligible for COVID treatment, or if you're applying for the self-isolation support grant. And that's what the Scottish Government website says at the moment. But thank you, Linda. That's a great reflection on the circumstances that we're seeing at the moment. Now then, let's move on because there's lots of news to cover this afternoon, it's useful thinking of your travel last week, Linda, because Boris Johnson has been warned that there is no legal or political justification for his plans to override the Brexit agreement on Northern Ireland in an extraordinary joint denunciation by the Irish and German governments. With senior figures already warning Johnson that he risks the breakup of the union by ploughing ahead with his plan, the German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock and her Irish counterpart Simon Coveney made a rare joint statement condemning the UK for unilaterally breaking an international agreement. Writing in The Observer, the two ministers suggest that Johnson's determination to override the Northern Ireland Protocol, which he agreed just 2 years ago, risks undermining the rules-based international order, just as the continent is attempting to confront Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. They say that recent elections to the Northern Ireland Assembly, which delivered a majority of members who back the protocol, showed support for the arrangements. They added that the EU has been and will continue to be flexible and creative to deal with issues that have hampered trade. They went on, however, unfortunately, the British government chose not to engage in good faith with these proposals. Instead of partnership and dialogue, the British government has chosen unilateralism. There is no legal or political justification for breaking an international agreement entered into just 2 years ago. The tabling of legislation this month will not fix the challenges around the protocol. Instead, it will create a new set of uncertainties and will make it more challenging to find durable solutions. So, Greg, firstly with you, do you think is the unusual nature of a joint condemnation from Berlin and Dublin, do you think is that significant?
I think it's significant, and I think we're going to see more. It used to be that the UK was part of a large multinational organisation. And then we've got more, and since Brexit, we've got more than 24 of those members of the EU just rounding on the UK, and it's effectively describing the UK as a rogue state. That's a very strong term to use, rogue state. We normally, treat that for kind of military coups and dictatorships set up afterwards. But a rogue state, one useful definition of that is a state which doesn't respect international treaties to which it is a party, not only to which it's a party, but would have actually helped to draft the legislation in the first place. And so that's what we've got just now with the rogue state of the UK. It's kind of embarrassing. What's even more embarrassing is where they hold two diametrically opposed opinions and are trying to find a third route out from them. The one opinion is that they want to withdraw from the EU, but somehow still continue to trade with the EU and terms favourable to the UK. That's kind of perverse. That's cake and eat it stuff. And the other is that they want to retain the integrity of the United Kingdom with Northern Ireland as part of it. Well, of course, they had to sign up to agreement whereby Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic were able to continue to trade in the same type of way that they did when they were both part of the EU. Okay, had to do that. But at the same time, there has to be a border between the UK and the rest of the EU, which it is now left. And the whole question has been over where that border should be, between north and south of Ireland, in the middle of the Celtic Sea, or not at all, but pretend it's not there. And they're caught between that rock and hard place, and their dogma have just come back to bite them on it. So it's and this retention of the integrity of the UK, let's bind these four nations together, is the one thing that's most driving the part. And we're seeing a move towards reunification of Ireland. We'll be discussing, I'm sure, later on, Scottish independence, and things are picking up very interestingly in Wales. So the UK is disintegrating under its own internal contradictions, and Brexit has just been the kindling under this bonfire.
Completely, Greg. Thank you. And Linda, the Leo Varadkar, who's the Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister at the moment, last week accused the British government of risking breaking up the UK because of its handling in Northern Ireland. He said that the UK government's actions were disrespectful. He said, "I think it's a strategic mistake for people who want to maintain the union, because if you continue to impose things on Northern Ireland that a clear majority of people don't want, that means more people will turn away from the union." He said it's a peculiar policy coming from a government that purports to want to defend the union. Now, it struck me, is Varadkar maybe pulling his punches a little bit here? The current Tory government purports to do lots of things, but actually does very little, apart from maybe spark culture wars on the front pages of the Mail and the Express, and otherwise spend all its energies reacting on a seemingly daily cycle of law-breaking and sexual harassment. So is Varadkar making a valid point here with regard to the prospects for breaking up the union?
Absolutely, and I think he did pull his punches. I mean, Leo Varadkar's not really known for being reticent in his opinion. And I had a wry smile at the word disrespect, because that's probably the weakest of the words you could use to describe the behaviour of the UK government, and I think Varadkar's right about that contradiction there is about the Tories holding themselves up as protectors of the union and all the rest of it, and the way they're behaving against the Scottish government and the total lack of any democracy that they're showing would suggest that is the case. But also their actions would seem to speed up the process, whether it be Northern Ireland, whether it be Scotland. And but I think the basis of this is the philosophy of this particular Tory government is short term. They don't think in the longer term. All they're ever chasing is what they see as the political expediency of the time. It's about the headline in the press that they believe their followers and their voters will read and appreciate, which is the Express, which is the Daily Mail, etc. So they don't think beyond getting through the next stage, and we see that all the time. We keep hearing these announcements and then know more about it. We keep seeing international law broken one day, as they do, without thought, and then standing up on their hind legs and condemning others for breaking agreements. So there is no long-term plan, there is no medium-term plan, it's all short-termism. It's all getting through the next week. And I think that's becoming more and more obvious. And as it becomes more and more obvious to the electorate, that is what is then going to break up the United Kingdom as we know it, because there will be a complete lack of faith in the UK government by those of us in the devolved nations. And it was interesting that Greg mentioned Wales, because there seems to be a surge again. And I'm a bit of a fan of the First Minister of Wales. I think he's a really pretty honest, upfront guy. And when I look at him as a Labour Party leader and the way he sticks up for Wales, and then look at what call themselves Scottish Labour in our own country, I think the difference is quite stark. And I keep waiting on Mark Drakeford to suddenly announce himself as an independista for Wales, because I think we're there.
Absolutely, Linda. I'm looking forward to discussing that announcement from the Welsh First Minister when it happens, because I agree. I think it's on the cards. But Greg, if what Varadkar says is correct with regard to risking breaking up the union, shouldn't supporters of democracy and freedom in Northern Ireland and in Wales and in Scotland do all that they can to encourage Johnson's behaviour? I'm thinking of the suggestion you should never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake.
Yeah, okay.
Mm.
It's a good line, and Marshall Sue was very good at that line, but it was a couple of thousand years ago when he said it. In slightly more recent times, we had terrorist groups in Europe, in Germany and in Italy, where their plan was to make the country so ungovernable that the state would clamp down. It would suppress people's rights. It would make it a horrible place to live. There would be a revolution, and then the terrorists would win. Yeah, okay, that was the theory in the 70s. Fortunately, it didn't quite get to that. There's better ways than just waiting until somebody rips up and destroys your country before you can say, hey, you made a desert, but let's call it peace. That's just not a good road to go down. So, no, I think I would be personally very happy if the people of the north and south of Ireland, entirely peaceably and for extremely sensible reasons, realised that one part of Ireland being governed by another country is really not really sustainable in modern times, and there are better arrangements. So, democratically reach an agreement to reunite, which they should never have disunited in the first place. So, enough on that.
That's a good point, Greg. Thank you. Let's move on now, because there's plenty else to be discussing this afternoon. And Britain's cost of living crisis is being made worse by Brexit, dragging down the country's growth potential and costing workers hundreds of pounds a year in lost pay. The Resolution Foundation think tank and academics from the London School of Economics have said that the average worker in Britain is now on course to suffer more than £470 in lost pay each year by 2030, after rising living costs are taken into account compared to what they would have remained following a Remain vote in 2016. In a report 6 years on from the referendum, the researchers say Brexit is damaging the competitiveness of UK exports on the world stage, just as companies are forced to deal with the fallout from the coronavirus pandemic and Russia's war in Ukraine, pushing inflation to historic levels. The foundation said a less open Britain is expected to be poorer and less productive. The report appeared to undermine the government's argument that Brexit and its plans to level up the economy would boost prosperity outside London and the southeast, with researchers instead finding that the northeast of England would be hardest hit by leaving the EU. With a bigger industrial sector and higher exposure to the EU market, the researchers said the region would see a 2.7% fall in manufacturing output by 2030, compared with a scenario in which the UK voted to remain in 2016. So, Linda, first of all, this analysis that doesn't sound so great for the so-called red wall seats in the north of England. Is the recently reported panic amongst the Tory MPs sitting in those red wall seats? Do you think, is that going to change will that drive a change in approach or attitude from Downing Street?
Well, that would go back, to the previous conversation we had about whether there's any real planning at the head of government, in Downing Street, and it doesn't seem to me as if there is. It's just constantly getting through the next day and staying in power. And the sad thing is, it's made me really sad, is that some of these Tory MPs and what are getting called the red wall seats, it's so blatantly obvious that it's all about hanging on to power and hanging on to being an MP. Not necessarily for their party, but sometimes just on a personal level. I mean, we saw that with a guy whose name I've decided to forget, who jumped from Tory to Labour. And, Labour accepted him. This is the other thing that really sickens me about UK politics. You got a bunch of Tories in these seats who are entirely self-serving and want to be re-elected, so will do anything they think is expedient for that. But you've also got a UK Labour Party who says, oh, come and join us. I don't care that you voted to do people down every time you went through that voting lobby. I don't care that you have said things that are so opposed to what we're supposed to stand for. We will welcome you with open arms. And it's all about just that maintaining power for the Tories and achieving power for Labour. So it seems to me they're one and the same. And there's this establishment down in Westminster that have forgotten what you're supposed to be elected to do, which is to do the best for the people who have put their trust in you. So that just totally sickens me about the whole thing. And I think at the top of the current Tory party, you have a bunch of folk who, again, are looking after themselves, looking after their own. We've seen that over and over again, and protect the establishment as they see it. And so, no, I don't think they will necessarily change course. I don't think they're capable of doing so. I don't think they have the intellect nor indeed the will.
Thanks, Linda. I think you were maybe thinking about Christian Wakeford, who was the MP for Bury South. He crossed the
No
floor in
idea.
January.
Decided he's not worth remembering and using up space in my brain for.
That's a good way of thinking about it. Absolutely right. Now, Greg, the Ryanair boss Michael O'Leary criticised the UK government and what he called the disaster of Brexit, which has stopped airlines from easily recruiting European workers and thus worsened their staff shortages this summer. Now, O'Leary's never one for missing and hitting the wall, so he said this is without doubt one of the inevitable consequences of the disaster that has been Brexit. Withdrawing from the single market just so that they can say we got Brexit done was the height of idiocy, but then they are idiots. So, Greg, is Michael O'Leary correct, both about Brexit and about the Tory government?
Yes, and yes. And he should be on this show and talking a bit more about it. The sad thing is this is one of the few broadcasting services which people in Scotland can listen to where you can actually use the B word. Because it appears that everything's got to, when the BBC is talking about the state of the economy, it's obviously purely because of COVID, but if it's something else, then it's because of greedy workers, it's because of all sorts of right-wing agenda stuff that they want to chuck at people to kind of keep them down. No, a large amount of it is directly because of Brexit, and Michael's absolutely spot on. But you see, he's not alone because the rest of Europe is looking on us, originally with anger, now with pity. Because we've allowed ourselves to be hoodwinked. Many have tried not to do so, to try to persuade otherwise, but not got there. And I'm not criticising the Scottish people, or even necessarily in general the population throughout the UK for Brexit. They were fed a line. That line was fed to them by very expensive communication channels. With the Leave side, very well funded through people who were going to benefit from leaving the EU. And I still guess we've got a recent case of the Tory parties and Tory parliamentarians have benefited very considerably from a donation from a Russian woman. Very good. Yeah, okay, that's perfectly legitimate. She's married to a guy who is he runs one of the major state banks in Russia. Gets a bit strange, doesn't it? And then, of course, that bank makes a considerable profit of the consequences of Brexit. That gets worse, doesn't it? So we have a situation where, and this is where I would like to see it go, that maybe a government would start from a position of some principles, those principles being looking after the welfare of the people who they govern, because I actually like to see it as the other way around. The people should be running and telling the government what to do rather than the government dictating to us. That would be a pleasant change. We have the opportunity to do that in the future, of course, in Scotland, because there is a democratic and progressive inbuilt majority in Scotland. That's remarkable. Not every country has that. We have, and I'm not going to criticise parties of which I'm not a member. I don't care about that. If parties care about ordinary people and have broadly a similar message, then they really should stop arguing with each other, get together, work with each other at least. And we could do that in the long term in Scotland and turn around the horrors that have been perpetrated on Scotland by elsewhere in the UK through Brexit, through mishandling of the pandemic, through an undermining and a continuing undermining of the rights of ordinary workers and the evaporation of human rights.
Thanks, Greg. And Lubov Tremukin, Greg's talking about you. And we'll be continuing to report on your involvement in UK politics whenever we can hear and learn more about it. Linda, there was one other piece of data that I wanted just to raise with you quickly. That's that financially squeezed households deposited less money into bank accounts in May than in April. Around 5.7 billion was saved in banks and building societies and national savings in May. That's down from 6.3 billion in April. And with inflation at a 40-year high and food and energy bills soaring, households, I would argue, have been left with less spare cash to save, unlike during lockdowns when saving jumped because people weren't spending their money. But I was thinking of a wider aspect of this, Linda. Do families, does the economy as a whole have the resilience required to resist a recession like the one that's heading our direction now, after more than a dozen years of Tory austerity?
Well, I worry that they don't, and I think the cracks are well there already. You look at the food bank use, and food banks have almost become part of our welfare system. It should never have been that way. And it's not that long ago that wasn't the case and that we were fighting against that. But now food banks have just become everyday things. Now, the fact that and I've seen it locally and I've read about it nationally, food banks appealing for people to make donations because they're running out of food to give to people. That's a big crack in any system that would suggest to me that sustainability is not there. We have employment laws, which we referred to earlier, which, whether it's 0 hours contract, whether it's statutory sick pay, it's all these things that really hammer people. And then when you talk about savings, there are people who, the very idea of being able to save anything is just pie in the sky. They cannot save. So, if we're talking about savings going down, that is now about people who have been able to save and now are not able to save as much. So again, that's a crack appearing. So it's now affecting every part of society except those that are fortunate enough that do not need to worry about such things, who are the people who are being looked after by this government. And the divide is getting wider and wider all the time, and that is not sustainable for any society going forward. The current UK government has no thought whatsoever for the well-being of society, which has become a bit of a cliche, unfortunately. We hear it talked about. Some countries actually look at well-being economies. Scotland is looking at a well-being economy, which of course can't become reality until independence. And then it's up to those who are in charge post-independence to put these things in place. But actually, well-being is extremely important for the sustainability of any nation, of any community. And no, the way the UK is going, the way it has already gone with the forced austerity and with continuing austerity, no, it is not sustainable. And people are already suffering, and many, many more will suffer before this is over, unless we really take action and do something about it.
Thanks, Linda. Your points with regard to the well-being economy, I think, are something that we're going to continue to look at, especially as people begin to discuss the nature of what Scotland might look like and what might be priorities for Scotland after independence. But Linda, you were also there. You've been talking before about who is in charge, or is anybody managing the UK economy at the moment? And Greg, output growth at UK manufacturers ground to a standstill in June, the latest sign that the economy is slowing as consumers cut back. We reported on this story earlier in the week when the closely watched S&P Global CIPS UK manufacturing report found that business optimism has hit a 2-year low, and that activity rose at the slowest pace in 2 years as new orders fell for the first time since January 21. And of course, as you'd expect, the consumer goods sector was especially hard hit as household demand has retrenched on the back of the cost of living crisis. So, Greg, first of all, does manufacturing matter in the UK anymore? And should it matter?
It must matter in almost every country in the world. You've got some very unusual, smaller, specialist countries that can survive as just safe havens for unsafe cash. And really, we don't want Scotland to go there. We actually have such phenomenal natural resources in Scotland that to not actually use them as being a major manufacturer is daft. Just doesn't make the slightest bit of sense. But to be able to trade, you have to have trade agreements. We've already talked about the trade agreements between the UK and the EU and the situation in Ireland and so on. Hopefully we get to a situation in the future where Scotland will be a normal trading partner with normal countries. But meanwhile, though, there's much that many of us would like to see us doing to prepare for that, which is problematic, though. There's a likelihood that we're going to see a ferry restarting within the year, running from the east of Scotland through to mainland Europe. Likely, but not there yet. What we really need is a significant increase in the port facilities to allow for the trading that hopefully will expand between Scotland and its European partners and internationally. But and here's the rub, and Linda touched on it earlier on. We spend money trying to mitigate the ill effects of policy that's imposed in Scotland. So you have the £20 a week taken away from the universal credit claimants by the UK government because they say, you don't need it anymore. What's £1,000? It's not much, is it? £1,000 a year. Actually, to somebody in the breadline, it's more than something. And yet we have to mitigate that. We have to mitigate the bedroom tax, a whole host of things. And from the limited resources, the smaller percentage of the money that we get back from Westminster of the money we send to Westminster, our cut of our own money, from the decreasing value of that due to high inflation, to try and invest in infrastructure simultaneously, build up our ports, improve our trading facilities, gear up our manufacturing sector. To try and do that simultaneously is difficult. We're doubly shackled on this. So tough job. I look forward to us actually casting off those shackles and actually being able to do simple things that normal countries do, like being able to borrow because we're a really good prospect and people are willing to loan us money so that we can grow the economy and grow and manufacture on the basis of that and thrive as a country. It really will be nice to have the chance to start to thrive again.
Thanks, Greg. You make a very good point there with regard to the value of money, if you will, both in terms of because costs spiraling because of inflation, and also because of the fall in the value of the pound, which I think is down about 10% on the year so far, and that features a little bit in what I was going to ask Linda next, because I was going to broaden it out from manufacturing to small and medium businesses more generally, which are reported to be stockpiling raw materials and ordering components 6 months ahead in order to guard against supply shortages that are preventing them from meeting customer demand. Construction costs are at fresh record highs and import prices are surging following a value in the pound. And so businesses are saying that much of their cash is now tied up in securing raw basic materials and components. Simon Gray, who's the head of the business accountancy body, the ICAEW, said that companies are suffering a hat trick of hurt that's forcing them to limit production. Business groups have urged the Prime Minister to agree a rescue plan to support companies clobbered by rising energy and fuel costs, wage inflation, and the surging price of imported goods and raw materials. So, Linda, having rehearsed through that story just now, it then struck me that we've got a Tory government at Westminster, so it's for the market to decide whether these hundreds of thousands of businesses will succeed or fail. With a Tory government, well, all the Tory governments I've ever grown up with, there shouldn't be any intervention in the market to support these businesses, should there?
Well, they're pretty good at intervening in markets that their pals run, you know. So it's also selective, you know, that quite happy to change rules, whether it be procurement rules or anything else, that would allegedly advantage certain people. So they do that all the time. They could quite easily bring in some rules and regulations that could help small businesses. And the backbone of the economy are small business. I should say, small businesses. And small and medium enterprises, in Scotland particularly, do fantastic work. And they do it by working really hard and having a belief in what they do. Now, at times they hit hard times, and they've been clobbered, even before pandemics, Brexit, or anything else, clobbered by the rules that are imposed by the UK financial markets. We all know the stories about businesses being lost and then taken over and all the rest of it. What we need now in these particular circumstances is a will from the top of government, the UK government that runs the financial markets and everything else, to put regulations in place that says that people can't be unjustly treated through these times. So where you have circumstances that have been brought into play because of the actions of a government, the UK government, Brexit is quite plain, where you have circumstances beyond anybody's control, to which some degree COVID and the pandemic have been, there must be special measures put in place that do not unfairly advantage small and medium enterprises who are always on that line of success or failure but are working very, very hard, or who end up with something like the haulage industry. My goodness, they're getting crippled just now by fuel costs. So there should be help put in place to make sure that these businesses sustain, because in the longer term picture, that's good for the economy because of the amount of jobs. Okay, it might just be a company that employs half a dozen people, but if you've got 100 companies that employ half a dozen people, that's a lot of jobs. So for the long-term benefit of any society and any economy, you have to put in place measures which protect these small businesses. And just saying leave it to the market is absolutely not good enough, because we've seen over many years, from when the last incarnation of the Tories wrecked major manufacturing in Scotland, we have seen over many years how the market does not benefit the good of all. It only benefits a very, very few. You just need to look at the pay packets of some of these folk at the top to recognise that.
Thanks, Linda. Now then, for our final item this afternoon, we'll come back to Scotland, because the majority of Scots are in support of independence, a new poll has found. A panel-based study published in the Times has found that support for independence outstrips those in favour of the Union and puts the SNP within touching distance of a majority of votes in a general election that could be a de facto referendum. The poll found that 48% of those surveyed in favour and only 47% against, while 5% said they did not know. So if you strip out the don't knows, the tallies are 51% for a yes vote and 49% for a no vote. And of course, this follows the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon's announcement of her plans to hold an independence referendum on the 19th of October 2023, with or without the permission of Boris Johnson. So Greg, firstly, coming to you, looking at the big picture first of all, what's your reaction and what's your reflection on the First Minister's announcement that was made on Tuesday this week?
I'm excited at what's happening. I'm not going to allow myself to get overexcited. We can just step back, clap ourselves in the back and say it's done, in which case we're done. So when people say, oh, I'm looking forward to the campaign starting, you know what, when we finish meeting here, and I'm enjoying the chat, so I'd like to stay even much longer, but when I finished here, I'm going straight into a meeting of my local Yes group, and we're talking about the campaign, which has started and which we're going to ramp up. Any notion of waiting for it is just silly. It has started here just now. There's a lot that's needing done, but nonetheless, the announcement this week clarified a host of matters. First of all, there was an issue about, is it legal? Well, we have used a little known section of the legislation which allows the Scottish Government to go directly to the Supreme Court and say, tell us if it's legal or not. We can't rely necessarily on the Supreme Court giving the ruling we want, and we certainly can't rely on the UK Government paying any attention to the Supreme Court. There's something I've been working on over the last few days. I'll go off at a tangent for a second. Bereavement grants to cohabiting couples. They were told by the Supreme Court, equality means that you've got to give the same rights to cohabiting couples as to married couples. And the UK Government has been ignoring the Supreme Court on that since 2018. You know, the government just ignores any law that it wants to when it suits itself. The law is there to serve the government, not the other way around. So, Nicola Sturgeon was great. She has given clarity. We're going for the referendum. She also has said what many people had hoped she might say, which is that we will not accept no for an answer because we actually have a mandate. We have the strongest mandate you can imagine. It's indisputable. And therefore will allow the Westminster election to be de facto, to stand in the place of a normal referendum. In my trade union days, we called this escalation. You would start at a low level, and when you were told by management, no, we're not going to do what you say, we'd step it up, and then up another level, and eventually up to the point where we won. And if the UK wants escalation through of democracy up to the point where using their own rules and their own election of a Westminster general election, if they say to us, we'll have no option but to use that because they're disregarding everything else, then that's what we use. And that will be the final mandate. There's been international rulings on this subject, and one of the most relevant ones was in Canada, where the Canadian Supreme Court was asked if Quebec, if there was no method for Quebec to become independent, no legal acceptable method for them to become independent, other than just declaring themselves independent. What would you say about that? They asked the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, well, you know, if there's nothing else, then they have an ultimate entitlement. So if there's no other method, that has to be a legal method. The international community's view on what we do will be very, very interesting indeed. But we are going through the process of escalation using what the UK says should be done, and then they're refusing to let us do it. You asking the courts, we'll see how it goes with that. Hopefully they'll say we're fine. But if not, then we move on to taking on the UK using their own rules. I look forward to that contest.
Absolutely. Thanks, Greg. And Linda, the SNP's Deputy Leader Keith Brown commented on the polling, saying, with support for independence growing to a narrow lead and only a minority opposed to a referendum next year, this poll underlines that it is the people in Scotland who have the democratic right to determine our own future and not Boris Johnson. So do you think, have voters in Scotland got their heads around, do they understand and agree with Keith Brown that it is for the voters it's the voters who have the right to determine their own futures and not some Tory Prime Minister who Scots didn't vote for, and indeed a Tory Prime Minister who Better Together said would never be Prime Minister?
Better Together said a lot, didn't they? And I think people are recognising that now. But I do think as much as the independence argument going on in Scotland just now, people are seeing the democracy argument as being really, really important. They are just aghast at the idea that somebody's going to turn around and say, doesn't matter what you want, you're not getting it because we're not allowing you to have it. And I think that has really, really got through to people. Now, I think back to the Smith Commission that I sat on in 2014, I think. It was right after the last referendum when parties in the Scottish Parliament came together and reached an agreement. And part of that agreement was that there was nothing agreed or in that report that should stop Scotland becoming an independent country should the people of Scotland so choose. Now that was firm and it was up front in that agreement. And we now have not just a Tory government, but we have a Labour opposition and a Lib Dems hanging on to their coattails saying, we don't care what we all agreed then, we're not letting you have your referendum, we're not allowing democracy for your country. And I think that's what's really getting to people now. So you've got the democratic principle that says, well, it's not up to you, we should be choosing. And you also have a recognition that the UK is going down the tubes and that Scotland can not only be a much better place to be and a much fairer country, but could also be an example to the other nations in these islands as well about a more democratic way forward and the choice of a better future. So I think all these things are coming into play now. It'll be interesting to see what the Supreme Court says. I don't know. I wouldn't pretend to know all about the legalities of these things. Sometimes the Supreme Court surprises you. But then what Nicola Sturgeon did announce is, that I think she used the term de facto referendum about the next UK general election. Now, I've heard all sorts of arguments against this. I've heard people saying, oh, you need this majority, you need this, you need that. And some of them are saying you need 60% and everything else. I would remind people that David Cameron called a Brexit referendum, and we ended up with Brexit when there wasn't a majority Tory administration in Westminster at the time. I would remind those that say you can't fight a general election on one principle. I seem to remember a general election being won fairly recently with the one tagline, which was get Brexit done. So don't tell us what's all right for other people is not okay for us. And I think that's another part of the democratic mandate that people in Scotland are buying into when they say, yes, if we want independence, we're going to have independence. And you know what? It's sounding quite a good deal to me at the moment.
Thanks, Linda. That's a very good point. And Greg, we don't have an awful lot of time this afternoon. However, you used a phrase that really caught my attention there. You were talking about the escalation of democracy. Do you think? Well, you can answer this whichever way you wish. Do you think that voters are going to respond positively to an escalation of democracy? Do you think there's an appetite for that in Scotland?
There is, and it's quite visible. You have people who are not only undecided on whether or not they want independence, but who maybe go along with the idea that it's okay for one partner in a supposedly equal partnership to suppress the rights of the other partner. But that doesn't go down well with too many people, because as well as people that support independence, there's another large chunk of Scottish society who are maybe undecided on it, but they absolutely support the right of people to choose what their own future is. What Linda referred to in the Smith Commission report, and what all the UK parties, major parties, signed off on, the right to actually choose a future for ourselves, should we decide at some time to do that. My reckoning is that, and we can see it in the polling quite clearly now, that people who are not yet decided on independence, but utterly decided that we have the right to make a decision, if they see further attempts to thwart us in making that decision, will say, right, okay, so I'm not even being treated as a democratic person with rights, never mind as an independent supporter. I'll tell you what, I will escalate this now. I will take a step up and say, not only do I support the right to choose, but my decision on that right is to vote for independence. This is going to backfire on the UK, and that's what escalation is about. Within trade unionism, it means that you step it up so that it's more and more difficult for the people who are trying to keep you down. It's more and more difficult for them to do so. And eventually that pressure breaks. And that's what we're going to do democratically. But here's the nice thing. In some countries international, the escalation is an aggressive escalation. Ours is the exact opposite. Ours is a democratic escalation where we're demanding more and more that the democratic, peaceful rights of people to decide on their own future should be respected. The international community will look on that with horror, and the UK hopefully will disintegrate under that pressure.
Thank you, Greg. That's a great way of summing up the conversation and the discussion we've just had with regard to the current state of the independence campaign in Scotland, because that's all that we have time for this afternoon. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to develop the station and to make new programmes for you. If you would like to support us, then please subscribe or donate to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. And you will find our appeals for financial assistance on Facebook and Twitter, because the urgent need for your financial support has not gone away. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you'd like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, we will be here again tomorrow evening with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us again then. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's been watching us this afternoon, and of course, a very special thanks to our very special guests, Linda Fabiani and Greg McCarra. Thanks, guys.
Welcome.
I hope that you enjoyed a tasty full Scottish this afternoon, and that you can join us again here on Broadcasting Scotland very soon. As Greg just said, I'm away to escalate some democracy. Bye-bye.